All right, so today, David Hume, as I described him, the wacky Scotsman. He's Scottish, and if you know anything about Scotland, you know it's a little bit different than the rest of the continent of Europe, and really even than the rest of Great Britain. In Scotland, they see huge telephone poles and think, hey, let's try to throw that and flip it over. Or they see a huge rock and think, I can throw it further than you can, right? And the men wear skirts. They can call them kilts if they want. We all know what they are. Um, they invent this game of golf to pass the time while the sheep are grazing. So they think a little bit differently. And David Hume's another one that thinks a little bit differently. In the age of enlightenment, the Enlightenment is blowing up. It's all about reason all over the place. And Hume's like, whoa, time out a sec. Maybe reason has its limits. That maybe, and this gets more into this ethical stuff, maybe things like emotions matter as much, if not a bit more, than reason. And it's sort of piggybacks on his metaphysics. We're going to focus on the metaphysics. He also, and this is, again, he's kind of steering this back towards Aristotle. At least he's attempting to. So Berkeley kind of led us down a Platonic path, right? Let's do Aristotle, empiricism, until we get to the end and realize, whoa, something's fallen short here, right? So either I can't know anything beyond what I'm sensing right now, or I've got to have God. Hume's not going to be satisfied with either of those. He's going to try to find a third. He's going to try to find a loophole. He's going to try to find something that we can have knowledge of that has nothing to do with perception. And he's going to try to be scientific about it, and we'll see that in just a few minutes. And therefore, he's going to try to be a little more Aristotelian. He's trying to be more empirical. But in doing so, really, he's implicitly kind of combining Plato and Aristotle in a really intimate way. When we turn to Kant, Kant's explicitly going to be attempting to combine Aristotle and Plato. Hume is doing it implicitly. He thinks he's doing Aristotle, but this loophole that he's found to solve Berkeley's dilemma is really much more Platonic, I think, even than Hume himself realizes. And so we're going to focus on an excerpt from part 2, which is where most of the excerpts we've been focusing on have come from. And it's entitled The Limits of Metaphysical Speculation. So part of what Hume is getting at here, and you get a little bit more of this in the excerpt from part 1, where he's talking more about skepticism of the mitigated type and the excessive type. The excessive type, again, the constant flyer, who's never going to land and will die of exhaustion. Okay, but we also don't want to rest in dogmatism either. We want to be a mitigated skeptic, right? In that perch of certainty that we realize is certain for the time being until something pushes us out, right? And Hume, again, he's sort of like an anti-philosophy philosopher. He's going to put a whole lot more stock in every day, in what most people, common sense, more so than these overly intellectualized things, right? Which again runs very counter to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, oh, let's become more educated, let's become more refined, let's think. Hume's like, maybe we can just, figure stuff out over some beer or something, right? So the limits of metaphysical speculation. He thinks, in sort of laying the groundwork in some ways for someone like Heidegger. Remember, Heidegger wanted to overcome all of this metaphysical speculation too, and let's get back to being, right? Hume is sort of saying, look, metaphysical speculation has its place, but it's a very, very small, specialized place. Most folks never think about metaphysics, and most folks do just fine never thinking about metaphysics. They can still live life fully without wondering about metaphysics. And so he wants to limit metaphysical speculation, not let it get out of control. Because if it gets out of control, that's going to lead to the excessive skepticism. You're never going to be sure where your hand stops and starts and the doorknob stops and starts. Oh my goodness, subject-object dichotomy. It'll drive you crazy. It'll drive you crazy. Many philosophers and philosophy professors have struggled with things like insanity. Some of them have even gone so far as to commit suicide. Hume is like, whoa, you're taking this stuff way too seriously. Live life first and foremost. So in some ways, he's sort of piggybacking off of someone like an Emerson or a Montaigne, right? Experience. Thinking, sure, is an aspect, but experience. Life is fuller than just sitting around thinking all the time. So, limiting metaphysical speculation. Before we even get to that, no, I'll hold off on this. Let's get the excerpt first. He's going to split the world into two. So now, anytime you see divisions at this point, you should be thinking, I wonder how this maps onto the divided line, which was about divisions. All objects of human reason or inquiry may naturally be divided into two kinds: relations of ideas and matters of fact. Okay, so he's splitting the world into two. Legitimate human inquiry falls into one of two categories, one of two classifications: relations of ideas, matters of fact. If there's anything that is not encompassed by one of those categories, then it should be cast to the flames, Hume says. That it's not a legitimate class of human inquiry. Humans may inquire about it, but it's not a legitimate class. It's therefore an illegitimate class of human inquiry. You know what's going to fall outside the confines of relations of ideas and matters of fact? Metaphysics. Metaphysics. And so later he says about metaphysics, just to finish that little story. This is the top of page 104. It may therefore be a subject worthy of curiosity to inquire what is the nature of that evidence which assures us of any real existence in matter of fact, beyond the present testimony of our senses and the records of our memory. This part of philosophy, it is observable, has been little cultivated, either by the ancients or the moderns, and therefore our doubts and errors in the prosecution of so important an inquiry may be the more excusable while we march through such difficult paths without any guidance or direction. They may even prove useful by exciting curiosity and destroying that implicit faith and security which is the bane of all reasoning and free inquiry. That's where metaphysical speculation falls. It's nice mental exercise to kind of get the brain going so that you actually think about important stuff later in the day. Metaphysics excites curiosity. It attacks implicit faith and implicit security. Mitigated skepticism is a good thing. Excessive skepticism is not, and that's where philosophy leads. That's where metaphysical speculation leads to, is the excessive skepticism. So knock it off already. Wake up in the morning, think about some metaphysics, and then get on with life. Really, is basically what Hume is saying here. A time and a place. And way too many philosophers, way too many educated folks have spent way too much time on the metaphysical thing. We need to limit metaphysical speculation. There are limits. Otherwise you'll go crazy. So back to relations of ideas, matters of fact. Of the first kind, the relations of ideas, are the sciences of geometry, algebra, and arithmetic, and in short, every affirmation which is either intuitively or demonstratively certain. The square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the square of the other sides. It's a proposition which expresses a relation between those figures. Propositions of this kind are discoverable by the mere operation of thought, without dependence on what is anywhere existent in the universe, and that's the key. That's the key to this loophole that Hume thinks he's found in the Berkeley dilemma. As I mentioned last time, I kind of wanted you all to think about. If you want to have knowledge beyond just what you can presently experience, and you don't want to rely upon God for it, this eternal perceiver thing, this is where Berkeley lives, it's one or the other. Hume thinks there's a third option. That third option is something that we can know. We don't need God for it. We can know it because it's not based upon perception. Now, what are some things that I could know that are not based upon perception? This will not surprise you all, class, because this has come up multiple times now. Mathematics! This intro to philosophy class is intro to the philosophy of mathematics. And probably not just because I started off as a math major. Math and philosophy are necessarily intertwined. I have a mathematician friend who goes crazy every time he thinks how close philosophy and math are. He wants to be a mathematician. But the deeper and deeper in he digs, the more he realizes, whoa, he's wading into philosophy territory. So, sorry, hold on just a second. math is metaphysical. You don't see the number 6 walking around anywhere. You don't get at the number 6 through the world of the senses necessarily. Right? 6 is this abstract concept. Right angles are really kind of abstract concepts. Now, we may see instances of them out there in nature or what have you, but really it's kind of an abstract thing. 90-degree angles, right angles, this thing is that thing, the relations between them. And notice the example he uses here, Pythagorean's theorem, right? You're relating ideas or concepts with one another. That's what he said one of the categories is. Relations of ideas. That's all it is. You're relating ideas. You're combining concepts. You're not finding stuff out there. You're not sensing anything. You're relating ideas together. So it's not based on perception. And yet you can know it because even though it's not based on perception, and you don't need God because it's not based on perception. Unless you want to go that roundabout thing like Descartes does, where math and God must necessarily be combined because God is a sustainer, which then ensures that mathematics is the same. Not only the truths of mathematics work like this, but also things that are true by definition. The classic example, all bachelors are unmarried males. You know what would be a huge waste of my time? Calling or speaking to every bachelor to find out if they are unmarried and to find out if they are a male. I know in the definition, I know they all are. That's what being a bachelor is. That's what it means. It doesn't have anything to do with perception. It has nothing to do with the world out there. It has merely to do with the idea and the concept. If I am relating the concepts correctly, I already know bachelors are unmarried males. These are the same thing. I've already conceived of an unmarried male when I've had the concept of bachelor. They're one and the same thing. They're not separate entities. Like Bucephalus being strong. Those are separate things. Bucephalus happens to have the characteristic of strength. Bachelors don't happen to be unmarried males. That's exactly what they are, is unmarried males. So some other things then that we can say about these relations of ideas. They are a priori. What does a priori mean? That means no experience necessary. I don't need to experience the thing out there, anywhere. This happens prior to experience, a priori, right? Like math, like what we call in philosophy tautologies, things that are true by definition. Okay? They give us certainty. They're guaranteed to be the case every single time, so much so that you cannot even conceive them to be wrong. You cannot conceive of the Pythagorean theorem not working. You cannot conceive, and we talked about this with Descartes and dreams, you cannot conceive of a squared circle. You cannot conceive of a triangle that has 7 sides. That's not a triangle. It's just not. By definition, it's not. It's not a triangle. That's not what a triangle is. If you think a triangle has 7 sides, you are wrong. You are incorrect. You are relating the ideas and the concepts incorrectly. You have a wrong idea about something. You can be right and you can be wrong with relations of ideas. You can be correct and incorrect. And it's demonstrated. It's demonstratively so. Demonstratively so. But it's guaranteed. So guaranteed you can't even imagine otherwise. If you can imagine otherwise, it's not guaranteed. I've talked about this before. However, it's also not particularly informative. You can't learn new things merely by relating these ideas together. Because you already know it. Every piece of evidence in support is mere confirmation and verification of the thing that you already knew. Every unmarried male that you meet that is a bachelor just confirms, oh, bachelors are unmarried males. You don't learn anything new. You already knew it. This just confirms and verifies it. That's all. Because of that, then, it's also not particularly interesting. It's boring. Once you know it, you're done. The end. Sounds kind of like some of the stuff that Plato said about the intelligible realm. Right? Again, you want to talk about mathematical objects. Everyone can intellectually know them. It's the mind, not the mind plus senses. It's also not the soul, because that's something different. They're objective. They can be known by everyone. They're a bit more universal rather than particular. Don't deal with perception. That's why it's not senses plus mind, just mind only. Once you have this information, then you can do nothing but then pass it on. Further experiences don't really do much for you because it further verifies the thing you already knew. So new experiences not really necessary. Interesting. And no perception, which is the key. It's why it's the loophole, Hume thinks. Okay? So what about the other legitimate class of human inquiry? Matters of fact. Matters of fact, back to page 103. The second objects of human reason are not ascertained in the same manner, nor is our evidence of their truth, however great, of a like nature with the foregoing. So it's not like relations of ideas. The contrary of every matter of fact is still possible. It's still conceivable. Not probable. Highly, highly improbable in many cases, but possible, conceivable. You could imagine it. Therefore, it's not certain and it's not guaranteed. It's merely, as a matter of fact, it happened again. As a matter of fact, this is still true. You don't know until the time being. You can't predict the future with matters of fact. It gives you no predictive power. Relations of ideas, you know, henceforth, forever and ever, bachelors are unmarried males. So they are. Done. You don't have to wonder about tomorrow. Mathematics is certain. Why? You don't have to wonder if it's going to be true again tomorrow. If you have to wonder whether it's true again tomorrow, then it's not certain. It's when you don't wonder, when you cannot even conceive that it's false. Then it's guaranteed, then it's certain, and it must be a relation of idea in some way, either mathematics or tautologies. True by definition, or the truths and the laws of mathematics, geometry, algebra, arithmetic. These matters of fact, then, the example he gives for matters of fact, that the sun will not rise tomorrow, is no less intelligible, no less conceivable, a proposition, and implies no more contradiction than the affirmation that it will rise. They're equally as conceivable, not as equally probable, but as equally conceivable. So matters of fact, then, are a posteriori, which is to say, experience is necessary here. You have to experience it to know whether it's true or not. Here's the empiricism part, right? Here's the rationalism part, relations of ideas, the loophole. Here's empiricism. Empiricism and rationalism together. Aristotle and Plato together. And you'll notice, as I go through the list of matters of fact stuff, it's going to sound very much like the bottom half of the divided line. So in essence, what we have here with Hume is the divided line, except I've oriented it the other direction. Instead of vertical, I've oriented it horizontally. Written them next to each other instead of on top of one another. But many of the things that I said about the intelligible realm and the visible realm can be mapped onto relations of ideas and matters of fact for Hume. Where Hume disagrees, then, is he thinks that should limit metaphysical speculation. Now, to some extent, Plato may agree. Remember, it's the soul that perceives and understands things like metaphysics, things like the forms. And so maybe speculating about them does have its limits. I don't think that's where Plato's going. That is where Hume goes. They sort of start in the same general area. Back to my matters of fact list. Based on experience, and so later he's going to say mere custom or habit. Remember the habit thing, that's what Descartes said. Mere habit returns him to his old habitations and opinions. And that's how he can go to sleep on night one. Habits. Right? We see one thing, we see another thing, we associate the two together. Post hoc fallacies. I pick up pennies, I have good luck, therefore the pennies must be the reason for the good luck. That's a post hoc fallacy. Hume says we do this all the time. Things just happen next. Things don't necessarily happen because of, but we smush next and because of together. Post hoc happens all the time. He's also the philosopher that I alluded to, who's going to talk about all generalizations are hasty. All generalizations are hasty, except for the relations of ideas kind. But all the generalizations that come with matters of fact, things like, oh, I don't know, gravity. You can conceive of gravity not working, therefore it's not guaranteed to work the next time. I've seen magicians, and they let go of stuff and things levitate and all that. I can conceive of things not falling when I let go. Which means it's possible. Is it probable? No. But it's possible. And we live our lives based upon these probabilities, not certainties. We live our lives as if they're certain, but they're not. I don't walk under heavy things that are hoisted above me. Because probably if something goes wrong and it falls, it's going to smash me. Gravity will probably still work, but it's not 100% certain. It's like 99.999, whatever. Like on the Maury Povich show, which for some reason is on sometimes when I go to the rec center and so forth. It says Maury Povich thing, these DNA results. You are the father. I'm waiting for one of my former students to be on there and say, whoa, hold on, Maury, hold on a second here. This is not 100% certain. We've got a 99.9998% probability. That's different than certain. So I'm probably the father, but I'm not certainly the father. So let's clarify what we're saying here, Maury. Probability, very different than certainty. We saw this when we looked at the deductive patterns. Possibility, very, very different than certainty. And all probability is a high degree of possibility. That's it. It'll never flip. It'll never flip from such a high degree of probability that therefore it is certain. There's always going to be a gap. There's always going to be a chasm there. All generalizations are of the hasty type. Probability that we live as if. And again, this is common sense. This is what most folks do. Natural instincts. Hume and others will call it some other places. We naturally don't question gravity. Why? Because we've seen it play out so many times. Every other instance of gravity that we see adds to the probability that it'll be that way in the future. Not guaranteed, not certain, but adds the probability. This is why kids, so last time I played peekaboo with you guys, kids, very, very young children, have usually it's like Cheerios or whatever, some type of finger food, and they let go. Whoa, it fell. How about, I didn't know that was going to happen. They legit didn't know that was going to happen. And they try it again. What? And they try it again. Oh my goodness. Right? They're trying it. With each instance, it builds up the probability that it'll happen again the next time. But again, it's not certain. And they haven't seen gravity work billions of times like the rest of us have. This is new to them. Whoa! Let's see if it'll happen again. Whoa! It's probable. It's possible it won't work. Right? The more instances of the Cheerio falling, the smaller the likelihood that it won't fall. And the smaller the likelihood that it won't fall, the greater the surprise if it didn't fall. But those first couple of instances, it's as plausible, it's as conceivable that something else will happen. That's why they keep trying it. What? They're not intentionally making a mess, typically, although some of them might be. You may have upset them earlier in the day. But they're doing science experiments. So probability. And this, so we can't imagine otherwise. Because of that, then because of the lack of certainty, then it's informative. We can learn something new from it. This is science. Science is not certain. Science gives probabilities. Science gives maybes. Hey, maybe this is the way things worked out. Maybe this white dwarf star thing is where the universe came from. Maybe. Sure. That's not just a guess out of nowhere. It's an educated guess. There are reasons behind that belief. There is justification for it. There's justification for believing that it's true. But it's not certain. It's possible. At best, probable. And we lived in a Newtonian physical world for nearly 300 years. Then Einstein comes along. And now we're living in an Einsteinian world. We also got things like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and all this other wacky, crazy science stuff. None of which is certain, man. Possible, maybe even probable. Not certain. Science is a matter of fact. Science is not as certain as mathematics and definitions. Science changes. And for more on how it is that science changes, I'd highly recommend the book Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, who was a philosopher of science at Harvard in the 60s. Wrote this book that's a philosophy of science book, but it's also the 1960s, so it's also sort of political text, because everything is also sort of political text in the 1960s. And he talks about these scientific revolutions and how it is that they come about. And of course, then you can put on your political lens and read it that way as well. So, more on this cause and effect, everything's a post hoc. Go to page 438. This is just the introduction. We're not even going to actually look at the excerpt from Hume. We're just going to look at the introduction that Cunningham gives, because Cunningham does a really nice job describing it. Page 438. Oh, there we go. There it is. All right. Starting in the second paragraph. Again, this is just Cunningham's introduction to the excerpt. In Inquiry Concerning Human Understandings, that's the larger work these excerpts are coming from for Hume, from which the present and preceding Hume set himself to examine the nature of power, force, energy, or necessary connection. All that stuff Locke talked about, right? This stuff by impulse, some power, right? Hume's like, that's not good enough, man. It's too mystical. Let me dig in, get a bit more scientific. Let me really dive in here, okay? His strategy, which stems from his empiricist account of knowledge, is to ask from what sensory impression this notion of necessary connection is derived. Right? The good empiricist has got to find something sensorily. I love Cunningham's words here. His, meaning Hume's, disturbing answer. So prepare to be disturbed. His disturbing answer is that nothing we observe, either in the outside world or from our own inner awareness of how we initiate our own bodily movements, is sufficient to account for this concept. When we see one billiard ball hitting another, all we actually observe is the movement of ball A followed by the movement of ball B. Any further conception of some power or force or some link between the first event and the second goes beyond anything we can detect through the senses, and therefore very problematic for the empiricist. Cause and effect is not out there, man. Cause and effect is a thing in here. It's a concept thing that we make up to try to make sense of the world. Out there in the world, this thing happens and then this thing happens. And we then jump to the conclusion this thing caused that thing. Especially the more we see it. The more regularly we see billiard ball A moving, striking billiard ball B, and billiard ball B moving, the higher the probability it'll happen in the next time. We live life as if high probability is the same thing as certainty, so therefore this thing is going to cause this other thing. This thing's going to happen, it's going to cause this other thing to happen. Cause and effect ain't out there. Events occur, then our mind gets to work and heaps on this concept of cause and effect to try to categorize. When I speak of categorization, that's on purpose, that's intentional. That should remind us again of Aristotle. We put things into categories. All events, as Hume puts it, seem entirely loose and separate. One event follows another, but we never can observe any tie between them. You never observe cause and effect. You never get at cause and effect through the world of the senses, through sight, through hearing, through tasting, through touching, through smelling. You never see, smell, taste, hear, or touch cause and effect. Because it's not out there. It's in here. Rather disturbing for a scientist, to be sure. The scientist is trying to observe the world out there. And instead, all it does is reflect the world in here. One of the things that Thomas Kuhn says in Structure of Scientific Revolutions, observation is theory-laden. The theory comes first. What you think is going to happen comes first before you run the experiment. And thank goodness. Otherwise, we'd have exploding buildings all over the place. Do you really want a scientist to walk into a lab and say, wonder what happens if we put these chemicals together? No, you want them to have some idea before they put the chemicals together. The theory comes first. Then they run the test to confirm their theory or to disconfirm. There's some word there. Their theory. It doesn't prove their theory. It gives more evidence for the truth of their theory. Science doesn't prove stuff. Karl Popper, another philosopher of science, says the whole point of science is to try to break the previous theory. To push your theory to the breaking point. So that's how progress gets made. Science is not, okay, we've arrived, we've proven it now. No. Because science proves nothing. You got to keep pushing forward. And Popper and Kuhn are both excerpted in your text. We go on with Cottingham's description on page 438, his introduction to one of the Humean excerpts. Hume's conclusion then is twofold. First, when we talk of A causing B, all we can properly mean by this is that events of type A are followed by events of type B. Causation reduces to mere regularity or constant conjunction. We see this and this combined together. We presume then that they are necessarily combined together. Necessity ain't out there. It's in here. Second, our belief. Our belief in some necessary link or connection between causes and effects derives merely from our subjective expectations. We have these expectations based upon previous experiences, somewhat like Aristotle, these concepts, right? The concepts get built from experience and then also help us to understand the next experience. Hume, in a similar vein, is saying that we have these expectations. I expect the Cheerio to fall when I let go. I'd be shocked if it didn't. Even though I realize it's possible it won't. The higher the probability, the higher the shock value if that probability does not come to fruition. The mind is carried by habit upon the appearance of one event to expect its usual attendant. Taken together then with Hume's critique of inductive generalization, this constitutes a devastating attack. So before we've been disturbed, now we're devastated. A devastated attack upon the rationality of science. In the first place, our tendency to generalize from limited data is not warranted by any rational process of argument or reasoning. Every generalization is hasty, but we must do it. We can't live life, Aristotle talked about this as well, we can't live life just these individual instances of things. It's not how this thing works. It's got to categorize. It's got to put into file folders. And so we do that. We abstract out, hey, this is similar enough, smash it together. Which then leads to the expectations. We have to generalize to live. But these generalizations are always hasty. We never have enough to make a safe generalization. We live life as if we do, because we have to live life. That's really, again, what Hume is getting at is living life, not sitting around metaphysically speculating all the time. Go live life, man. Go throw some rocks and telephone poles. I know, they're cabers. It's the caber toss, not the telephone pole toss. You look at a caber and tell me you need a telephone pole. If scientists then think of themselves as uncovering the secret connections that will unlock the mysteries of nature, if they claim to investigate the underlying powers or forces in things, Hume's blunt reply is that we have no idea of such a connection, nor any distinct notion of what it is we desire to know. Laws of nature, then, this is page 105, we only get through experience, therefore not really a law. A certain expectation, a certain probability, not a law. These cause and effects are necessarily different things. He talks on 106. Otherwise, you'll be able to find a thing and know what caused it and what effects it'll have. A strange new thing that you haven't experienced before, and that's not the way things work. You have certain expectations. Heidegger again talks about this with equipment and so forth, right? So then, actually, let me now reference this. This weird piece of paper Dr. Schrappe has. I'm glad you asked, class. This is from a magazine called Parkscope, which is published by the Parks and Recreations Department of Columbus. It's a magazine that tells the events that are coming up and so forth. They also have articles. So this is from winter of 2011-2012. So winter of 2011 moving into the early months of 2012. Right, stuff in like December, January, February, for instance. It's about snowflakes. Right, so it's a nice little article about snowflakes. The lighting is weird, sorry. About snowflakes. Okay. But what I want to draw your attention to is snow facts and fiction. This is a park magazine. Remember, this has nothing to do with philosophy. This is about the parks. But philosophy's everywhere. For instance, snow fact or fiction, no two snowflakes are alike. Here's the answer. This is a good philosophy question. It actually says that on the thing, I promise. Can you read that? No two snowflakes are alike. This is a good philosophy question. This is a Parks and Recreations Department publication. This is a good philosophy question. Why? No one has seen every snowflake, so this could be a false statement. It's possible, it's conceivable that in the history of the planet there have been two snowflakes that are exactly alike. Possible. But snowflakes are so complex, it's probably true that there are no two snowflakes that are alike. Probably. That was a really weird face. Sorry about that. Hope that's the thumbnail for this. That'd be fun. Highly probable that there have never been two snowflakes exactly alike. But not impossible. And in order to confirm it, in order to make that generalization, you'd have to experience every single snowflake. After which time you could say, well, as a matter of fact, no two snowflakes are alike. It doesn't go against the definition of what it means to be a snowflake if there are two that are alike. It's not a contradiction in terms. As a matter of fact, after having looked at every single snowflake ever, no two are alike. And no one has experienced every snowflake, nor will anyone ever experience every snowflake to confirm whether that's true or not. So what we're left with? Probability. They're really complex. So probably no two the same. And like humans, there's probably not another person on the planet right now or ever who's like this. Apparently there is one that looks like this, but he's British, so my friend told me. Not exactly the same. DNA is so complex, it's highly unlikely that two strands have ever been exactly alike. But possible. We've got, what, 8 billion people on the planet now? Those 8 billion plus all of the other billions that have ever been on the planet? Never, ever have there been two that are exactly the same? Unlikely, I guess. But possible? Hume goes on. Again, page 107. Again, we're limiting metaphysical speculation. We haven't got a metaphysics, right? If physics itself is merely probable instead of certain, why go further out on a ledge into something even less probable? How does that become a legitimate class of human inquiry? Physics is probable. Metaphysics, therefore, further away, more abstract, less certain. This already isn't certain. This is certain. This is less certain. Metaphysics, even less than certain. So why worry about it? Except to wake up and, exercise your brain and stuff. Curiosity. Take this stuff too seriously, man? The good stuff is right here. The matters of fact stuff. That's informative. It's interesting, because that's life. Life is not certain. If life were certain, imagine how boring it would be. Now, surely all of us would probably like a little more certainty than we currently have. But if we knew exactly what was going to happen next all of the time, that would be awful. Be horrible. Where's the mystery? Where's the fun? Where's the beauty? You'd expect everything. No thanks. No thanks. Page 107. All our inquiries of men regard only matter of fact and existence. These are evidently incapable of demonstration. Whatever is may also not be. Again, the to be or not to be speech from Hamlet. No negation of a fact can involve a contradiction. Right? As a matter of fact, this happened. As a matter of fact, this didn't. No contradiction. As a matter of fact, the Cheerio fell. Great. As a matter of fact, the Cheerio didn't fall. Okay. No contradiction. There's nothing definitional about Cheerios that they all must fall always or something along those lines. It'd be based upon experience, not based upon the concept itself. Experience then leads to the concept. We have these presumptions. Presumption is different than certainty. The non-existence of any being, without exception, is as clear and distinct an idea as its existence. The proposition which affirms it not to be, however false, is no less conceivable and intelligible. The case is different with the sciences, properly so called. And by the sciences, what he means, abstract mathematical sciences. You can see the footnote right here. Every proposition which is not true is therefore confused and unintelligible, because you're relating ideas. That the cube root of 64 is equal to the half of 10 is a false proposition, and therefore can never be distinctly conceived. 5 doesn't equal 4, man. It just doesn't. It just doesn't. Again, regardless of how you feel about it, regardless of what you want, it just doesn't. It's not true, therefore you can't know it. And you don't have good justification for it either. So if you choose to believe 5 equals 4, that's just you being crazy and choosing your belief of something that's false. But that Caesar or the angel Gabriel never existed may be a false proposition, but still is perfectly conceivable and implies no contradiction. Existence and non-existence. It's possible. And look at these historical figures that may or may not actually be historical figures. King Arthur. There may have been a king named Arthur. There may also not have been a king named Arthur. That's why it's legend. We don't know, nor will we ever know. All we have is possibles and probables, right, based upon historical sources and who wrote what, and so on and so forth. It's more likely Caesar actually existed than the angel Gabriel actually existed. That's all we have. More probable, less probable. What makes it more probable? We got to go back to justification again. What justification are we going to use? Well, we weren't there for Caesar or Gabriel. So we got to rely on other people's perceiving of Gabriel and Caesar. And you get into confirmation bias and all of that stuff. So Hume, while trying to be more Aristotelian, finds himself actually being a bit more Platonic than he wants to be. In so doing, combines Plato and Aristotle, though he doesn't necessarily mean to. The next guy, Immanuel Kant, means to. More on that next time.